Welcome to Data Science Perspectives. This series focuses on analytics and data science professionals from across industry to learn about how their career unfolded, what skills they look for when hiring, and what trends they think are coming next. I'm your host, Bill Franks. Let's get to it. Welcome to this episode of Data Science Perspectives. I'm your host, Bill Franks. Today we're lucky enough to have Kathy Koontz join us. I've known Kathy for close to 20 years now. I first met her when she was managing a data warehouse platform and customer analytics processes for Office Depot. From there, she moved on to Nationwide Insurance, where she served as a vice president in the analytics area, helping them build out enhanced customer analytics. She ended up coming to Teradata, where we worked alongside each other for several years, and then we also worked together at the International Institute for Analytics. More recently, she joined Amazon Web Services to help them build out their analytical capabilities and platforms. She's one of those rare people that can fill a wide variety of roles. In fact, as we'll discuss in the interview, she actually has started with a journalism degree, but got interested in analytics and databases and self-taught herself everything she needed to know to rise through the ranks successfully. She also does a lot of volunteering and is just a fun person to hang out with, and I think you're going to really enjoy what she has to say today. So with that, let's welcome Kathy to the show. Hey, Kathy, thanks for joining me on the show.
Hey, great to be here, Bill.
So one thing I find interesting about you and your background, we often talk in the field about how people get into analytics and data science from all sorts of different backgrounds, and very few follow the official traditional path. You actually started out with a journalism degree, which is by far not the typical path into analytics. So how did you transition from a journalism degree into analytics and data science?
Yeah, my 2020 hindsight answer always is, well, journalists were kind of the original business intelligence folks, right? They took existing information, they reorganized and packaged it to help drive understanding or different decisions. Now, I wish I could say my career path was that intentional, but I remember I was working doing media relations for a large teaching hospital. And, one of my favorite bosses of all time used to always tell me, Kathy, you're way too analytical about things. And that was a little bit of a foreshadowing of where I might end up. And, I think the way it happened was I was actually doing marketing and media relations for a large nonprofit based in South Florida. And a lot of our work went through small church newsletters and newspapers. And I worked with the IT director to basically build a PR CRM system homegrown there at the organization. And when she saw the way I thought about things and approached things, when her manager of donor data left, she asked me if I'd be interested in taking the role. And that was my transition into data and analytics. And it was best decision I've ever made.
That's wild. So it was almost you stepped above and beyond your job to help make something happen, and next thing you know, it was your job.
Yeah, and I remember having a conversation with my husband, like, because I had to manage all this donor data. It was on an AS400. I had zero. I mean, that's how long ago it was. I had zero technical experience except for a couple of basic and COBOL programming courses that I took in college, and I was really nervous about taking the role. But my husband, he was like, "You're smart. You'll figure it out. You got somebody who wants you to do it, so take a chance." And I'm glad he encouraged me to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know. I think when I very first met you, it was way back when you were still at Office Depot, and since then, you had a path through a couple client side organizations. Office Depot, Nationwide, Wells Fargo. You've been, more on the consulting side at times with Teradata, IAA, and now at AWS. So, obviously, as you work for some of those big companies, there's differences in the ways that they handle things, and there's similarities. What are some of those key similarities and differences that you found as you've worked across multiple organizations?
Yeah, I think the one thing, especially for data and analytics professionals, to think about in large organizations, especially in regulated industries, is the focus on data security. You know, a bank, if they have a really horrific data breach, I mean that could be crippling to them and their reputation. And so that focus on data security in large organizations, particularly financial services ones, is key. I think the other thing is um, the diffused decision making nature of large organizations. I mean, there you just have to bring a lot of people along with you as you're trying to make progress and drive change. And this sense of, I own anything and am the final decision maker, I think is a little bit of a fallacy that people have. And so just understanding the need to navigate broad groups and influence a broad set of stakeholders to make progress is also a real, common similarity across large organizations.
Yeah, to me, that gets to one of the things I think helped you be successful in that role is I know you've always been really good at getting people to come together and making a case, making people not be threatened as you challenge them across. I've seen you in multiple of your roles over the years as a client and as a coworker, and so I think that's an important thing for people to think about because in that case, the fact that you didn't come from explicit technical background initially, though you acquired those skills, that has nothing to do with what you just talked about, right? That's an entirely different set of skills.
Yeah, I've done some. I have a talk that I've done for data science students that are getting ready to graduate or early in their careers, and I say, it's the title of it. The skills that got you here won't get you there, and it really is about developing those that ability to network, to influence people, to communicate in a way that is meaningful to the recipient. And those are really the skills that can differentiate somebody who does have that technical background, but is looking to have broader influence across an organization. And I think it's something that in our industry we may not spend enough time coaching and practicing in, but it can really be a make or break for somebody in a technical role.
Yeah, and it's funny too. I think we everyone pretty much agrees on that today too, right? Which I'm not sure that would have been true 20 years ago, but I think people like us all talk about this. But the funny thing is, I've been on both client consulting side over the years, and now I'm at the university side. And the reality is, well, everyone really talks about it. I don't think any individual companies, consulting firms, or universities are really doing any substantive things to officially help students gather those skills. They tell them that they'll need them, but then they go on to their next technical course or they go on to their next project, and it's really more of a self motivated or viral kind of teaching of each other than it is explicit programs, which surprises me. It feels like somebody should have come up with
Yeah.
stuff by now.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think, it's probably sprinkling in some of those classes that, from the management consulting firms that they have kind of training up their consultants. Many of them have an approach and a methodology for that, but it hasn't really been extended over into the technical roles yet. But one really helpful practice that we had at one of the companies where I worked is this culture of feedback, and not in a way of derogatory or negative, but the way we structured it, and anybody was empowered to give feedback to another person. So I mean, I could go up to the CMO after a meeting and just pull him aside and say, give him feedback. And the format that we used was, I observed you doing X, it had the effect of Y, you might be more effective if you did Z. And by following that simple format, it is a very non-threatening way to give kind of a clinical assessment to what somebody did. And that was really helpful when I was coaching data scientists to present in large meetings with short attention span executives. I would prep them beforehand and we'd role play, but then afterwards, I mean, immediately after the meeting, I'd get with them while the experience was still fresh in their mind and give them that feedback. And if I had observed them, perhaps stumbling in the meeting or something. And I just really recommend that organizations adopt that sort of a culture where anybody can give feedback to anybody else, and it's not just accepted, it's expected.
Yeah. What you just said there, I love that, even expected. I remember a couple years ago, there was a survey around, CEOs, and the general premise. I actually think I wrote a blog on this, like, is your CEO clueless or being misled? And the premise was kind of what you're talking about. And the survey sort of uncovered this. We might have a problem that an analyst finds it's really bad, and they tell the manager. The manager has to go tell the director, and they sugarcoat it just a little bit because they don't want to look too bad for the manager. Then the director has to tell the VP and sugarcoats it. The bottom line is, by the time it gets to the CEO, what might be an almost show-stopping problem becomes, there's a little blip we might hit, but it's not much to worry about. And then people wonder, well, why didn't senior management do more? And I think it comes down to what you said. It's not just that those senior managers have to be open to that feedback, because even if they're open to it, people may be hesitant. They almost have to demand that feedback, right? You almost have to get in trouble if you didn't give them the blunt feedback, or else people just won't be comfortable doing it, especially junior people. They don't want to go and say something that they know will be perceived very negatively up the chain, but those are often the most important messages that those people have to hear.
Yeah, I think that that culture of candor and transparency as well. It's interesting in my role now. We talk a lot about agility and experimentation and innovation. And one of the things I talk to companies a lot is, you know, you have experimentation requires failure. And we've heard this admonition in the industry for so long about, fail fast. If your company doesn't have a culture that celebrates experimental failure as much as it celebrates experimental success, you're not going to have people who want to fail fast, because the political capital that it costs you if you have an experiment that isn't successful is it can be, career crippling. And so that culture of candor and transparency and a willingness to say, we're going to try something, we're going to experiment, and if it works or if it doesn't work, the knowledge that we create by proving that it does work or it doesn't work is equally as valuable. And until that happens, it's hard to really create an environment of experimentation.
That brings up a good segue, I think, is that, even back when you first started with Office Depot 20 years ago, really a large part of your role was pushing the limits of scale as it existed at that time. And I mean, and of course, over the years, that's how we got to know each other, was in discussing how to do that. I know when you went to Nationwide, you were helping them push the scale. You came to Teradata when we worked together there, in part because you wanted to help other companies scale. And of course, at AWS now, that's all about scale. So you've kind of seen the entire scale challenge evolve over the last couple of decades. What do you think some of the differences are in terms of how we're challenged with scale today versus how it was years back? And are there some ways that really we're just back to the future yet again?
Yeah, well, I mean, not to be too pedantic about it, but it's the cloud. It has really changed those scale challenges, and that process that we used to have if we wanted to introduce a new business capability, launch a new personalization model. You had to get server space, and you had to estimate your peak workloads, and you had to make sure you have licenses for anybody that might even touch the system once, and you could budget for that. Well, those days are gone now, and you can spin up and spin down services and try things. And so the cloud has really fundamentally changed that scale conversation. But what I've observed is that organizations still use a lot of processes and practices that are much more aligned with that old kind of long ramp up to a new capability, and not the agility that the cloud allows. So until those processes and approaches are changed around how projects are defined, delivered, prioritized, valued, monitored, until those processes change, organizations are not going to have that combination of agility and scale that the cloud allows. I mean, scale is no problem on the cloud, but the agility to be able to get to that scale quickly is really reliant on having the appropriate internal processes to enable that.
Tindra, I guess that's another kind of evergreen theme that applies in different ways at different times. The old, well, you have new capabilities in front of you, and it's not the lack of the capability; it's that you're trying to use the new capabilities in the using the same procedures and approaches you use the old capabilities, thereby leaving a lot of opportunity on the table because you're not maximizing the new capabilities. So I think that's a great insight from you on that. Um, I also know that over time, you've probably spent, at least in the interactions I've had with you, it seems like you've put a huge focus in your career on customer, consumer related analytics. What is it about that space, the customer, consumer side of things, that got your interest in the first place and then held it for all these years?
Uh, Basically, the unpredictability of these human beings, right? When you're dealing with like, let's say, manufacturing process improvement, right? You're not going to have the coating on a semiconductor decide it's not going to respond or it's going to change, right? It's much more predictable. And so I really think customer analytics is such a great big data use case, where the more data you get, I mean, you can make such significant leaps and bounds in the ability to predict and direct, the behavior of humans. And it's really about using data and analytics to try to uh, help your customers, both internal and external, make a better decision through the analytic products and services you're providing. And so just being able to be a part of that, of helping a human being make a better decision, has always just been fascinating to me.
Well, one thing that you might be able to give some insight for folks, whether it's a student coming out of school wondering what path to take in their career or somebody on a path that might want to change, you're one of the people who has done, heavy client side roles over the year and heavy consulting side. What are some of the pros and cons of those two worlds that you've experienced personally that you could share to maybe help someone know if which is best for them?
Yeah, and I think here's the thing I'll say, like, which is best for somebody, it depends, right? I do think it is really helpful for people early in their career, if they have the opportunity, to spend some time on the consulting side, because you get such a variety of experiences, different, perhaps different industries. You learn how to navigate organizations more quickly. You can get up to speed much more rapidly, perhaps, than people who've never been in those consulting type roles. So I think it's a best practice to at least do that for a period of time. Now, what I see is that folks who really create a strong attachment and sense of ownership to what they create, who want to be involved throughout the entire life cycle of a project and really want to be there all the way through the end, to the launch and the usage and the evolution of the project, those folks struggle sometimes in consulting, because we have defined phases of a life cycle that we're involved in. And those folks oftentimes do better in organizations where they can, have much more longer term kind of relationships and ownership of the work that they do. So those are some of the differences. I think the other thing too is, as I mentioned earlier, working in large organizations really requires an investment in, building and maintaining your network and cultivating it over time. Uh, some folks just can find that a little bit overwhelming or not enjoyable. And so just kind of thinking about the different types of relationships you need to create and maintain, your relationship with the work that you're going to have, is really key to kind of think about, should I be in consulting, or should I be on the client side? But for me, I mean, depending on the opportunity, I like to go back and forth. And so I don't think it's definitely not a single track that you have to get on and stay on. There are always options to pivot.
Yeah, I can tell you, on that theme, I know somebody here in Atlanta, a friend of mine who was at senior roles at a number of companies, been client side for many years. He just got snapped up by a consulting firm because they really value his deep experience in those areas. And similarly, if people pay attention to the news, it's actually much more common than you'd expect that suddenly there's a new SVP or C-level position filled at a major company, and it's somebody that's had years of management consulting experience, and it's in part because they want that breadth of experience. So I agree with you, having been on both too. I think really it's not an either or. You can mix and match both, and in fact, companies are willing to consider people from the other world, even if you've spent time there. So, but I like the idea that you mentioned about early starting. Maybe starting and making sure you get that variety. Um,
hmm
let's
Yeah,
let's take it to
I was just coaching. Well, I just was going to tell you, I was just coaching
yeah.
a friend of mine who just graduated from a data science program, and she had an offer from a company and a consulting firm, and I recommended she take the consulting offer, at least for the first 2 years, just to get that variety of skills and experiences.
Let's take a totally random turn here. So one thing I know about you is that you're really big into cycling, doing distance rides, 100-mile plus at a time, and so forth. We've even taken a ride or two together over the years. So what got you into that? That's not, again, that's just one of those things. There's a lot of people into it, but what got you into it and so serious about it even today?
Yeah. Well, so my Florida poster in the back. I'm in Columbus, Ohio now, but I grew up in Florida. And when I lived in Florida, my exercise of choice was doubles beach volleyball. I mean, played from the time I was in high school until I moved to Columbus in 2006. I actually played doubles with my daughter, for many years, and that was a lot of fun. But my beach volleyball declined in proportion with the decline in the number of beaches when I moved to Ohio, and I needed to find something else. And I don't get a lot of satisfaction just kind of going to the gym to work out. I mean, I like to have a little bit more of a social aspect to it as well. And so my husband was a cyclist, and so he talked me into starting to ride with him. And our youngest was older at that point in time, so we could go away for 3 hours at a time, which cycling is a long time commitment to do distances. But once I got in it, I just loved the social nature. I mean, we go on group rides, and we might ride 100 miles and average 15 miles an hour, and it's kind of grueling, but it's fun to go through that with friends and see the countryside and explore new places. And so I really like cycling, and it's also a really data rich pastime. I mean, you can gather so much data and analyze it, and some of the tools that they have to track your effort and your mileage and your heart rate and your all of these things is really cool. And it's funny, we finish rides, and I have my Garmin, and I make sure it gets uploaded. And some people are like, if you didn't take a picture, it didn't happen. And with my cycling, I'm like, well, if I didn't collect data, it didn't happen. So it really kind of brings together two of my passions of kind of social active exercise with data.
Yeah, I love to collect data too. I think I told you the story that not long ago I was really, really pushing myself to hit a certain average speed on this ride, and it required me really pushing the last few miles, and I barely got to that average speed with like just under a quarter mile to go. And when I got to the parking lot, by the time it took me, the 15 or 20 seconds I had to slow down, turn into the parking lot, get to my car, and I'm going like 1 mile an hour, it actually then was just enough to drop me down a tenth of a mile an hour
Point
average,
nine.
because
Yeah.
yeah, and I was like, no, but that's
I
the
feel your
downside of data
pain.
collection.
I feel your pain. I've been there myself.
So maybe one quick one for you it would be which skill, if you picked one, of skill or trait you have, do you think's been most key in helping you be successful in your career?
Well, I'm going to say two because they're interrelated. It's curiosity and problem solving. It's the ability to look at something and decompose it into where the problem is most likely occurring. And when I was interviewing folks for my team, when I was two levels above them, I would always take the last interview just to make sure I felt like they would fit with the culture and they had the right mentality to be successful in the group. And for a long time, one of the questions I would use is say, okay, I have a home stereo system. I have four speakers. I have, an amplifier unit, and one of the speakers has a crackle in it. How would I go about determining where the problem is? And if they could not take that and break it down and say, well, it could be in the speaker, it could be in the wire, it could be in the jack, and from the unit, and walk me through that, then I would know maybe they don't have the curiosity and problem solving that really is required for the types of roles I was hiring. And I remember I had one guy say, well, I don't know anything about stereo equipment. How am I going to know how to do this? And he got a little indignant with me. And it was interesting because this was a role in financial services, and he had no experience in financial services. And I looked at him, I said, well, tell me about your experience in financial services then, because you're going to have to decompose problems in financial services. And he kind of, I saw the light bulb go on over his head, and then he kind of rewound and started thinking about it. So it's really that problem solving and curiosity with maybe a little bit of a dash of that curiosity. I want to figure it out, and I won't really, it's hard for me to give up until I do. I don't really call it competitiveness, but I do like to figure things out, and it bugs me if I can.
So the key question, did that gentleman overcome the hole he dug with that initial answer and get the job or not?
No.
That's what I suspected. Uh, well, hey, I want to thank you so much. I think your insights have been terrific today, and hopefully listeners are gonna appreciate it. And as always, it's great to have insights from you. So thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, always great chatting with you, Bill, and good luck and have fun with all those bright students at KSU.